welcome back to my channel. I am so excited for today's recipe. We are making a recipe that's been in my family for over 100 years. This recipe first came from my great-great Aunt Ruby, and I'll post a picture of her on the screen now. This is kind of every time I make this cake, I think of her, and it's something that my family has passed down generations to generations, and we used to call it the Aunt Ruby cake. And then my husband, once we got together and he started coming around, he loved this cake so much it kind of got renamed Mark's cake. But it's a cake that has been made for holidays, graduations, birthdays, and it's just so amazing. This took me several years to make whole food plant-based and to get it to taste just as good as the original. So I'm very proud of this recipe. The original recipe had tons of oil, sugar, eggs, butter, I think, you name it, it was in it. So it's something I'm very proud that I've recreated, and I know that your family is gonna love it. If you haven't become a member in our private Facebook group, I'll post the link to that down in the show notes. So you can just click on the arrow down below and it'll take you to our Facebook group. I made this recipe available in the group on Christmas as my Christmas gift to them. And so many people have made it and loved it. We have been told that this recipe reminds you of a devil dog mixed with a ho-ho cake. So no matter what, I promise you, you're going to enjoy it. I'll post a picture of the final result on the screen. We chose to make this into a loaf recipe, a loaf pan cake recipe. I just like that it's nice and thick and you can see the nice layers. This original recipe, you know, my family's recipe was served in a bundt pan, but you can play around with it. It just might vary on times, lots of different things. So I like to do this in a loaf pan. This is how we always make it here. And then, you know, you can play around with whatever pans that you have at home with it, but it's just so delicious. There's two parts to this recipe. There's a cream cheese filling, which we're going to make in a high-speed blender, and there's also the cake batter part, and then we put the cream cheese filling in the middle and bake it, and it's just fantastic. This would be great for Valentine's Day coming up. It's a cake we make on special occasions. We make it on Christmas, we make it on any holidays. Sometimes we request it for birthday cakes. So if you love chocolate and you love like a cream cheese filling, this is for you. And so it would be great to make it for Valentine's Day coming up, or if you have a birthday or something else. But we're gonna get started. I like to make a little joke, since this recipe is 100 years old, that you can go out and get your blender or your mixer. I'm just kidding, this is a prop. I'm gonna do a little shout out to Reeves from All Your World for the prop. But we're gonna get started. It's really two parts. This is a little bit more of a complex recipe. It's not really that bad. I break it down and make it really easy. But again, I tweaked this from a recipe that was 100 years old, been in our family. So if you want to start and tweak a couple things, I'll give you a couple hints as we go, but I totally suggest you doing it the way that I'm gonna show you now. So get out a high-speed blender. We're gonna do the cream cheese filling first, just to get out of the way. I really like this because it's still pretty simple, and I did try to make the nuts that we use for this part relatively low for a whole entire cake. So we are going to use 1 cup of cashews that are raw. Again, if you kind of go out of this recipe, I'm not sure how it'll turn out, but relatively for a large cake, 1 cup isn't bad for the entire recipe. I'm just saying. So 1 cup of raw cashews, 1 cup of white beans that you rinsed and drained if you're using a can. I have 6 pitted dates, 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract, and 3/4 cups of a non-dairy milk. We're gonna blend that together until smooth. You also can get out some dark chocolate chips if you want. This is optional. And we're gonna kind of fold that into it once we blended up everything. So get out your high-speed blender, 1 cup of raw cashews, and the recipe is on our website. You can print out the PDF on our website, and it's also down below in the show notes, so you don't have to take notes. I'm just saying, I do go through everything for you guys. So 1 cup of raw cashews. I have 1 cup of white beans that are drained and rinsed. 6 large pitted dates. I'm using medjool dates. If you're using something smaller, you might need more, but it's around 6 of them. Make sure you take the pits out. 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. and 3/4 cups of a non-dairy milk that's unsweetened and unflavored. This should make a very thick filling. So I'm going to blend this, transfer it to this bowl, and fold in my chocolate chips, and the first part of the cake is done. So I'll see you guys when it's all blended. After everything is blended, it should be a very thick batter. You also can taste it now. If it's not sweet enough, you can of course add more dates. That's kind of optional, but 6 large ones are perfect for my taste buds, so that's what we've stuck with. So go ahead and transfer it to a bowl. And I just love this. This is just like such an amazing filling. So much reminiscence of the cream cheese that we used to put in the middle of the original cake. Make sure you scrape it all out. If you do not have a Vitamix, you can soak your raw cashews and your dates in water, then drain off the liquid and add them to a blender. So I do have a Vitamix that does a really great job with blending. That's just a little heads up. Also, if your blender is having trouble, you can add a little bit of extra non-dairy milk until everything gets blended smooth. You want this batter to be, or this mixture to be very, very smooth. All right. So once you have everything in your bowl, you can fold in some dark chocolate chips. This is optional. It really does help to make it extra chocolatey if you do this. There are several different brands that you can get that are 100% dark chocolate. We have the Santa Barbara chocolate that is one ingredient. It is dark chocolate. And to be honest, I was somebody who hated dark chocolate before being SOS-free plant-based. And these do not taste bitter to me personally. I think because my taste buds have changed so much. But whatever dark chocolate chips you want to use, you can. A lot of people ask me if these are super bitter, and I find when you bake it, it's totally fine and it tastes like chocolate. Another company that makes 100% dark chocolate chips with nothing else in it is Trader Joe's. So you can find them at Trader Joe's, or you can order a big bag off of Santa Barbara Chocolate Company, and I will link this big bag down below as well. I get lots of questions on what chocolate chips we use. So it's optional how many you want to put in too, but I like to put in, you know, this does make a large cake, so I like to not be super stingy with it, but just mix it in. Once you mix it in, we're going to set this aside and make the cake batter, but like half of the recipe is done. Pretty easy, right? All right, put this aside. I'm going to get out everything for the cake batter, and then we're going to assemble and bake, and the recipe will be finished. Everything for the cake batter is all measured out. So we're going to walk through the ingredients. Again, everything is written out down below in the show notes, so you don't have to take notes, but I'll walk you through it. I did do a couple things ahead of time and let it sit for around 10 to 15 minutes. So you might want to do these first before you measure out everything else. So I did make 1 flax egg. And how you make a flax egg is you take 1 tablespoon of flax meal, which means that you've grounded down the flax seeds, and you mix it with 3 tablespoons of water. You let it sit. You can put it in a little glass bowl, and it'll gel up and make our egg substitute. So I made 1 flax egg, and again, let that sit for like 10 to 15 minutes. You also are going to make your own buttermilk. So I took half a cup of a non-dairy milk that's unsweetened and unflavored, and half of a teaspoon of apple cider vinegar, and I just let it sit for a couple minutes, and it'll make a buttermilk substitute. So these two, do ahead of time. The other thing too is this recipe calls for 1 cup of hot coffee. Now lots of people ask me, can I just not use coffee? You need to use 1 cup of hot liquid. And again, this recipe is over 100 years old, so I tweaked a lot of things to make this really delicious and work, but I didn't really touch this part. So I have 1 cup of hot coffee that I've brewed. You also can use something like Dandy Blend if you're not having caffeine. You can make 1 cup of Dandy Blend, you know, that you're ready to go. You also can use 1 cup of tea. Any 3 of those will work. Some kind of 1 cup of hot liquid is needed. So 1 cup of coffee. I also have our flour. So I have 3/4 cups of an oat flour and 3/4 cups of a whole wheat flour if you are gluten-free. You can sub the whole wheat flour for buckwheat flour. If you want to mess around with anything else, I'm not sure. So there is a gluten-free option to swap the whole wheat for buckwheat, but we're going to use oat flour and whole wheat flour for our recipe. And I will put that in the show notes as well. I have 1 teaspoon of baking soda and 1 teaspoon of baking powder. Really easy to remember. Half a cup of an unsweetened applesauce. I have half of a teaspoon of vanilla extract. Half of a teaspoon of white miso paste. That is our salt substitute. I have it right here. I have 1/4 cup of cocoa powder that's unsweetened. Now you can use cacao powder, but it will be a little bit more bitter. So I like using an unsweetened cocoa powder for this. Just a heads up. And then I have half a cup of date paste for our sweetener. You also can use date sugar. It's 1 to 1, half a cup of date paste or half a cup of date sugar. Either one works. And that's it, okay? Very simple. Make the flax meal, the buttermilk, and the coffee the first thing that you do, and then you can measure out everything else. So we're gonna mix together all the dry ingredients first. So in a large bowl, I've added in our flour. I'm also gonna add in our baking soda and baking powder and our cocoa powder. Okay, those are kind of all the dry ingredients for this part. Get a whisk and you can mix those together. This recipe is not very hard once you do it. Really simple. It seems more complex, but it's not. All right, once that's whisked together, you can go ahead and we're gonna dump everything else in. So I like to add the miso in next. The hot coffee actually helps like melt everything really well. And so nothing's like clumpy or anything in this recipe. Add in your flax egg. Make sure you get it all in there. Our vanilla extract. Date paste or date sugar, either one works. Our applesauce, now the date paste or date sugar, either one works. All right, and then I'm left with the liquidy stuff. So I have our buttermilk, and then really what's gonna help everything blend really well is that hot cup of coffee or tea or whatever you're using. You can use decaf coffee too, it doesn't really matter. As long as it's, I would say warm. It doesn't have to be scalding hot, but warm. And then you just want to whisk everything until that flour and everything is really incorporated. It should remind you of like when you make box cake, kind of this consistency. So just take a moment and really make sure you break up that miso that was in there and everything else is well distributed. And then we're gonna assemble, pull back out that cream cheese mixture, and we are ready to bake. Now you're gonna preheat your oven to 350 degrees. This cake takes a long time to bake. It takes around an hour, depending on your oven. You can do the toothpick test. Generally, if you do the toothpick test down to the cake part before you get to the cream cheese part, you can tell if it's finished. But it generally takes me an hour to bake this. So we are gonna get our loaf pan out and get started. If you're using a different pan, it might take a different amount of time. The other thing too is if you're not using a silicone loaf pan, you want to line this with parchment paper, okay, because we're not using any oil. All right, just do your best so that there's no big lumps, but it kind of reminds me of not so much cake mix, but like the brownie mix you used to get. Kind of that similar consistency. All right, I'm gonna clean up for a second, get my cream cheese out, and we're gonna assemble and bake this. Let's put this cake together. So we're using a silicone loaf pan. If you're using something else, you might want to use parchment paper. You don't want it to stick. If you're using a different pan, that's totally fine. It just might vary in the bake time at the end. If you do anything different to our recipe, make sure you leave a comment and let us know if it turned out, if it was successful, and that way other people can know if they're gluten-free and want to use something else like gluten-free flour that's not buckwheat like I suggested, it worked. So make sure you leave a comment as well. All right, so what I like to do is I'm gonna do half of the cake batter, the cream cheese filling, and then fill it with the rest of it. So it's a little bit of an art, I'm just joking, it's really easy. So just get your cake batter, pour in, I eyeball it, so roughly half. That looks good. All right. Try not to make a mess with pouring. All right, save that. And then I'm gonna add in all of the cream cheese filling. And I just try to evenly kind of do my best to kind of spread it in the middle. My favorite part. I feel like some people love, in our family especially, there were people that loved the chocolate part, cake part, and there's people that loved the cream cheese filling. I was definitely, the cream cheese filling was my favorite. And it's still true with this. It's just such a nice like combination. I made these for my husband's graduating from his master's degree. I made a ton of them, and everyone really enjoyed it. So plant-based or not, and my family members that had the original and had our version. So I'm excited for you guys to try it at home. All right, now that I got that all in, it's gonna be pretty full. This cake doesn't rise a ton, but it does rise a little bit. So just spread it out. You can put a pan underneath it if you think that it's going to go over. Mine never does. It always looks like it's going to, but it doesn't. All right, I'll take a picture so I can show you guys on the screen now. I will probably lick this clean. It is so good. All right, let me grab my camera. All right, let's fill the rest of it up. So just so you can't see that cream cheese. And like I said, it's gonna look like it's gonna go over. And it'll rise slightly, but it shouldn't rise like crazy where it's fallen off of your pan. It is an overly stuffed loaf pan. It should like just make it. All right, now carefully put this in the oven. Again, 350 for around an hour. And then we're gonna pull it. You wanna let it cool completely before you remove it from the pan. But I'll show you a picture right now how it looks. It should be very full. And I will see you guys when it's all finished. After the cake has come out, you wanna let it cool completely. And like I said, it won't overflow. It turns out perfect. Let it cool and then you can remove. When I use a silicone pan, what I like to do is take a butter knife and just help out my cake by just carefully going along the edges just to make sure nothing sticks when we go to remove it. Now for this, you're just gonna need to flip it. Again, make sure it's cool completely before doing this part. That's kind of the way to do it. And then I just like to slowly help my pan. Comes out perfect. And then carefully turn it over and your cake is beautiful. Now, our favorite way of serving this cake and eating it is actually when it's cold straight out of the refrigerator. You can serve this warm, but it is so much better when this cake is served cold. And this is how we did it with the original cake back when I was growing up until I made this cake. Once it's done, resist, resist trying it. Put it in the fridge, and you can even leave it in your pan and put it in the fridge once it's cool. Don't put it in hot, let it cool completely, put it in the refrigerator, and then have it when it's cold. Cut it, serve it with a nice glass of non-dairy milk. It is fantastic. And again, the recipe is on our website in a free printable PDF that you guys can have. Now I will cut into this cake so you guys can see it in real time, see the cream cheese filling. I'll show the camera up close, but generally we really love having this cold, just as a heads up. All right, I'm gonna cut it and show you guys the inside. Are you ready for the big reveal? It comes beautifully when you cut it. Look how amazing. I can pick it up, right? So good. Again, the perfect way of serving this is cold, in my opinion, with a big glass of non-dairy milk. Of course, I have to try a bite on camera. This recipe is a 10 out of 10 in my opinion. One of the favorite things I've ever made. And I love that it's a family recipe. So make sure you please subscribe, Give this video a thumbs up. Leave us a comment if you make this any different ways. And I will see you guys real soon for the next one. We make whole food, plant-based, SOS-free recipes every week, multiple times a week. I'll see you guys real soon for the next one. Enjoy the chocolate cream cheesecake. Bye.